I would like to introduce you to your first presenter for today, Mr. David Grindell. Mr. Grindell, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is David Grindell. I'm with ACI out of our Toronto, Canada office. I've been with ACI about 15 years, and about the last 8 to 10 of it been working with our Canadian customers on EMV implementations and the implementation of ACI solutions to assist them. So I'll be taking about the first third of our hour today, and then handing off to Nigel Codderington, who will introduce himself at that point in time, who will speak to you about an actual EMV implementation experience he's run through. Three major pieces to our session today. The main focus of this is how EMV is going to affect you specifically as an issuer. If there are non-issuers on the call, you'll still obviously learn some things. On the ACI website, you will find a more generic EMV overview webinar that we did a few months ago that you can also download and listen to. After discussing some of the details of EMV issuance, we'll then move to some tools that ACI can supply to assist you through this period. And then the last half of the hour, Nigel will be speaking about his experience in an implementation of some EMV tools. Just before we get into those three topics, just last week, there was an announcement that greatly shifted things in the U.S. payments market. And I should have said last month, obviously. Last month, Visa came out with a set of announcements relating to the implementation of infrastructure around EMV and chip card, and for that matter, contactless and NFC as well. The Visa announcement put in a bunch of programs and mandates to try and move along the payment market to incent merchants and acquirers to get going, and put some mandates in as well. A lot of industry analysts feel this could be just what's necessary to begin moving the U.S. along. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of chatter in the industry about EMV in the States, probably for the last 18, 24 months, and the magic silver bullet seemed to be missing, and this could be just what's necessary to get going. Interesting, I'll speak a bit about this in the next slide as well. What's very interesting about the Visa announcement is that they also firmly have their eye on some future payment innovations. Some of the incentives that Visa has put in place apply not just to an EMV device, but they require the device support contactless, and in some instances support mobile payments using NFC. So they're very much trying to make it easier for merchants and acquirers to provide them some kind of roadmap so that they protect their investments in new hardware. Let me, at a very high level, discuss the timelines and the Visa announcements, and all the detail of what I'm giving you today is available on the Visa website as well. I'd recommend you download the actual announcements themselves. So August 2011 at the left, obviously, is when the announcement took place, and the three colored bars are kind of the three pieces of activity. There's the actual devices themselves and the acquiring systems, the systems that need to be upgraded on both the acquiring and the issuing sides, and then getting the actual EMV payment cards out into market. Some of the first two have already taken place. I mean, there are a few EMV devices out in the field. Some merchants, along the likes of Walmart, have already started down this path, and this announcement will no doubt hurry up the rest of the market. By October of 2012, Visa has put in place an incentive for merchants and acquirers to put in EMV terminals. If enough of their terminals are enabled, they will get a break on their PCI security audits. I don't have time to get into all the details. It is not a matter of the number of EMV transactions, however. It's a matter of the number of EMV devices. So the fact there aren't a lot of EMV cards in the States is almost irrelevant. This incents the merchants and the acquirers to get moving. The ability to get a break on your PCI security audit is a somewhat significant incentive for merchants that have had to be PCI compliant the last couple of years. By April 2013, Visa has in fact made a mandate that all merchant acquirers, processors, and ISOs must have their systems ready to process EMV transactions. and the announcement specifically says both contact and contactless transactions. So this gets the acquirer side moving. The last piece is more of a hammer, which is the liability shift. So by October of 2015, the liability for a fraudulent card transaction in the United States will shift to essentially the party with the weaker security. Today in pure magstripe, as long as the merchant and the acquirer have done everything properly, they have an authorization code, they can provide a signed receipt, the issuer is liable for fraud. In the new world, after liability shift, if the issuer had a valid EMV card in the field with a chip, and the acquirer only had magstripe infrastructure available to him, then the liability for the fraud actually falls to the acquirer because they have not put in proper security terminals. And because of some industry specifics, gasoline retailers and their in-pump card readers generally get a couple of extra years to roll this out. We did this in Canada as well. And so fuel dispensers get an extra 2 years to move over. We fully expect that some issuers will start deploying cards well before the last minute. Some will go over the deadline, and ditto on device upgrades. I'm sure some merchants and some devices will be laggards, so this will stretch out for a while. So, as an issuer, why is this important to me? Well, as I was describing earlier, there's this real chicken and egg problem of issuers not wanting to put EMV cards in the field with no devices, and merchants and acquirers not wanting to spend the money on devices with no cards. And between the incentive carrot and the mandate stick, this should be enough to get the acquiring side of the United States moved along. I will say as an issuer, in the short term, you need to be concerned about this. While the 2017 date looks a long way out, or the 2015 date, you have a long time frame to implement EMV. The system changes all have to be done, and those, as you know from your systems group, can take 12, 18, 24 months with testing. But you then also need to start rolling out your cards. And most issuers in Canada, almost all issuers, chose not to do a mass issuance with the expense, but rather issued EMV cards on the natural expiry cycle. So that means it's a 36-month time frame to roll out your EMV cards. In the long term as an issuer, this may be a critical piece to your business given Durbin. As you see your interchange revenues begin to decline, you need to bring down your expense line to match. And EMV will absolutely begin to reduce the counterfeit and lost and stolen card losses that you see today. Once your competitors start moving, and I speak specifically of your issuer competitors, you are also going to have to move for competitive reasons. If there's one lesson we've seen, among others, the fraud quickly moves to the weakest link in an issuer in a competitive way. So as the laggards in getting their issuing portfolios to chip will be the easy targets for the fraudsters, and towards the end of that chip rollout, we'll be suffering tremendous losses. Finally, there's also some positives. The move to EMV lets you introduce some new and innovative card products and some new and innovative payment products through things like NFC. The ability to create an EMV card that has particular characteristics can be targeted to very specific subsegments in your consumer target market, gives your product management people the ability to really play around and make interesting new products. This next slide it just gives you a little more of the actual text from some of the Visa announcements, so I will not cover it off, but it's here when you download this presentation. It will be made available on the ACI website. So a couple of times in this presentation today, we are going to ask a polling question. So on the right side of your WebEx screen, we just simply select, before this call, were you aware of the Visa announcement around chip and NFC? Please select the radio button on the right and click Submit. Okay, thank you. And then a follow-up question to that one. If you were aware of the announcement, Has it so far caused you to change any of your then previous business plans or change any dates you may have had around any EMV business plans? You should see on the right of your screen that we quickly flashed up the results of the first poll. While you're clicking in on that, I will mention, by the way, that in some breaking news, just Friday, MasterCard has also sent out an EMV announcement of some sort. At this point, it's only gone to the actual MasterCard issuers, so the announcement is not in public, but it seems to be around getting ATMs to be EMV enabled as well, whereas the Visa announcement was mostly about POS and card issuance. Great, so we've closed our second poll, and it's almost split down the middle, 58-42, that this has not caused people to change any plans. So, moving on. So what does this mean for the marketplace? Well, EMV is a very broad brush that affects just about every actor or character in the payment schemes. Everyone from the consumer that now gets a card, and depending on if the card is chip and signature or chip and PIN, will now interact with that card differently. Issuers now need systems to be able to issue EMV cards and authorize them. We'll touch on both of those later. Acquirers obviously need to change their infrastructures. Merchants need new devices and training for their cashiers, which is always an issue in some retail bases. And then finally, the schemes and the networks obviously have to update, not only just their systems to be able to process EMV transactions, but the card schemes have to put in place an entire key management systems of certificate authorities, as well as putting in place the certification labs and processes to certify new the issuers and acquirers. It affects every player along the way. But today we're focusing specifically on issuers, and so I'll talk for the next little while on these four major broad points. Starting with card products. So, as I alluded to a bit earlier, EMV is going to be a boon to your card product marketing. So in this sense, I'm talking specifically about product management. How do I create a product? What features does it have? What customer segments and subsegments am I trying to reach? And EMV lets you play with a great many variables in how your card acts and reacts to its environment. It can, for example, you can set up an EMV card to have different payment characteristics based on the dollar amount of the transaction, whether it's domestic or international, whether it's a cash withdrawal or a purchase. And your ability to, and then for offline transactions, you also then get a lot of flexibility around limits. So it lets your product management people play with a lot of levers. And some of them I put up there in front of you. So obviously you're going to make a card decision, right? Something as simple as credit debit. Now have a big gold square in the middle of your card artwork, and it seems like a trivial issue, but this can cause all sorts of difficulties and delays with issuers that have very particular graphics on a card. You're going to decide how your card works in terms of fees, and are you going to go PIN or signature, and also what combination of applications will you put onto this card. A MagStripe card was pretty much a single application. It was a debit card. You can now include your debit card app, a loyalty app. You can put in applications that allow your customers to do secure web banking transactions and a secure logon into your web banking environment. Lots of possibilities that you can give to your cardholder base. I've given an example of some of the ones up there, everything from a pure debit card at the top. The third from the bottom, the gray card, is a dual interface. I don't know if you can see the Pay Wave logo in the middle of the right side of the screen. So that's another choice you have as a product management decision. Contact only, contact or dual interface, and contactless. And then the bottom 3 points are mostly outward facing. How will you segment your customer bases? How will you get your cards out there? You have a consumer and a cardholder education issue. How do you teach them about this new thing? You also need to get across the message that this is a more secure payment instrument without engendering too much fear about the MagStripe that many of your customers still have. So now that you've got the cards out, you now need to also worry about your systems to support them. So the process of issuing a smart card is extremely complex compared to that of a mag stripe, and that's where smart card management systems come in that we'll talk about in a second. You are managing multiple applications. Your EMV applications have a great number of settings called including things like issuer action codes that define how the card operates and how it interacts with its environment. EMV has a whole security area of keys and key management. Each EMV card has a specific and card-specific set of keys in order to do secure transactions, and that's another area that needs to be managed properly. I spoke a little earlier about the parameters you manage. This is how the card reacts in the field, and what's interesting with EMV is you can actually change the behavior of your card in the field. When you issued a mag stripe, it was static. It didn't change for the life of its use. With an EMV card, I can actually reach out into the field and touch it in what's called a post-issuance sense and change how it works. And that includes blocking that card temporarily in a risk situation until I can confirm the cardholder still has the card, and then I have the ability to actually unblock it in the field. Where in a mag stripe world, you might have blocked that card and reissued. You can do that same kind of behavior with applications. You can add applications to a card. You can delete them from a card. And there are examples around the world where institutions have been doing that as well. I spoke about keys. There's also, if you go chip and pin, you have the same issues with pin management on an EMV card. And EMV absolutely changes your fraud monitoring. Fraud will still exist. I mean, EMV addresses counterfeit fraud and lost and stolen. You still have first-party fraud, friendly fraud, and other types of fraud, including account takeovers. So your fraud systems need to adapt to those new kinds of fraud, as well as use the data elements that EMV provides. You get a lot more information about the transaction. Moving from back office to front office, your authorization systems obviously have to now handle EMV. So on the authorization side, there's new data, there's new cryptography, both on the request message to verify the card and on the response message, because the card makes sure that the response came from the real issuer. The commands that I was referring to earlier, which are called EMV scripts, also have some security wrapped around them. Obviously, if you're changing how the card works in the field, the card wants to be sure that that command is coming from the actual issuer. And so you need systems that generate these scripts and secure these scripts. And finally, your PIN management is going to get a little more sophisticated in a chip and PIN world. PINs are contained both in the card, or you can choose them to be in the card. Canada did. Their PINs are all offline. But that same PIN needs to be in the host for online messages and for a few other areas in working with a customer. So whenever a customer does a PIN change on a chip card that is pinned, that PIN change needs to go to 2 locations. And then finally, what I usually like to call is the forgotten piece of EMV is working with a customer. The customers are going to have issues. Cards will fail. Customers will forget their PINs. They won't be certain what this little gold square is. And they will walk into a branch and say, my card's not working. They will call your call center and say, something happened with my card. So there are new areas in your customer service channels that have to be aware of what chip cards are, aware of what a particular customer has, because my card might be different from that other guy's card, and they have to have the information to be able to diagnose and assist that customer. So mostly branch personnel, call center personnel. Also affects things like dispute management. So you should get far fewer disputes in an EMV world, but you still will. And the data around those now changes. The data that a merchant or an acquirer represents to the issuer is a little more complex because it includes things like digital signatures to prove the transaction actually existed. And then you have the whole customer service management around PIN blocks and unblocks. So those are the 4 main areas: product management, back office, authorization, and customer services. These are the 4 areas as an issuer you need to start worrying about when you do your EMV planning. Let me talk a little bit about the systems that support you doing this. and you have two very generically broad options about how you support these systems. The first, obviously, is to take all this in-house. You will need to implement some kind of a smart card issuing system. There's a category called smart card management systems. These do not replace your existing card management. They augment it. They complement it by taking the information that comes out of your current CMS and adding smart card data. The domain, if you will, the information domain of a smart card management system is really about the applications going onto that card. They don't replace all the information and customer knowledge up in your card management system. The first question that I've always asked, and I think every one of the Canadian banks asked me that, was, well, why can't I just add that functionality to my existing card management system? Well, the answer there is that most card management systems at most banks that I'm aware of are, let's say, to be polite, older. They're a little more static. They haven't changed much in recent years. Often I've seen banks that are reluctant to touch their card management systems because they're getting a little creaky. And there is a real risk in adding an entirely new area of functionality around EMV to that old card management system. They're often mainframe host-based, often COBOL, and issuers have been very leery to do that. The other piece to remember with EMV is that it's a very flexible target. Things will change over time. You'll roll out your first EMV cards, you'll learn some lessons, and you'll change how you want to address the market. Or a competitor will do something that makes you change your product plans. So your smart card issuance process needs to be flexible enough to handle those changes. Finally, there's the area of post-issuance. That's reaching out and touching the card in the field. It's a very difficult piece of functionality to shoehorn into an existing older card management system. So in general, I've told my clients here that the lesser risk is to bring in a smart card management system in-house. Also, some of the security people are very leery of letting EMV information and security keys outside of their in-house environment. Finally, this gives you a lot of flexibility when it comes to where you send your cards. If you've got your card management and your security in-house, you can change card bureaus, get a lot more independence, a lot more negotiating leverage with the bureaus that actually produce your cards. The other alternative, of course, is to outsource this. Now, in the U.S. market, a great deal of this takes place already. Companies like TSYS and First Data already outsource entire card portfolios from the issuance and personalization through the processing. With smart card management, your bureaus also likely could step up and take some of this. It's definitely an easier approach. The outsourcer will just do it all for you, and you don't need to worry about it. What you do need to worry about is losing control over your smart cards. When you want to make changes, you're subject to the change windows and change control processes of the outsourcer. Your security people may want to weigh in on the card keys and security information being outside the bank's domain and an external domain. And lastly, when you want to reach out and touch that card in the field, you're again subject to the windows and the parameters and the change control of your outsourcer. So let me now work. We've talked about the systems you need to implement. I'll quickly go through some of the ACI solutions that you can use to fill that gap. The major one right in the middle is Token Manager. So this is a bit of a flow diagram. Token Manager is part of the issuance process. So your card management system tells Token Manager these are the cards I want to issue, and Token Manager contains all of the smart card information that then gets passed down to your card bureau. And I'll come back to that in a slide or two. There are also the rest of the ACI product suite. Our major flagship payment engine, Base 24 EPS, obviously is EMV enabled. It's in production around the world running EMV transactions for both acquiring as well as the authorization of EMV. And our other payment engines are also EMV enabled, most notably our Base 24 product, and for any retailers or most smaller acquirers, the Retail Commerce Server product. The ACI Issuer product, which is a card management system, is also EMV enabled, and usually we install along with Token Manager to provide the smart card management support. The Token Manager product is actually one that we deliver in a partnership with a firm called Bell ID. Bell ID is a firm out of the Netherlands, has been recognized as one of the world leaders in smart card management systems. And Bell ID and ACI recognized that we each were best of breed in our respective markets and combined to bring an integrated smart card management and EMV payment solution to the global marketplace. ACI has been involved in smart cards for a number of years as well. On the payment side, Bell ID is 100% dedicated to smart card management systems, and the partnership has existed for, I'd say, a little over a year. The Token Manager product has a wide number of modular functionality, so you can pick and choose just the modules and the functionality you need. And I won't run through each of these, but I will pick out a few. Includes application management of both single or multiple applications. So this is how you decide which combination of applications are going onto a card. It supports the scripting you need to control those cards in the field. Includes things like PIN management. And Bell ID has a module specifically to allow your cardholders to do EMV PIN changes securely over the internet channel. There's been a lot of concern about chip and PIN cardholders who travel to areas outside of your ATM reach, so they can't use the ATM as a PIN change device. The Bell iPIN solution allows them to do PIN changes over the internet and do it in a secure manner. And the last two interesting pieces, in-branch instant issuance. In the Canadian market, it was almost a requirement from the get-go that customers could walk into a branch, open an account, and walk out with a card. And so the ability to issue an EMV card on the spot was an essential piece of the product. And then lastly, in terms of being prepared for the future, the Token Manager product also can personalize EMV and smart card tokens over the air for things like managing applications in NFC phones. So it is ready as the States and Canada start moving into NFC mobile payments. This diagram is trying to show you what a smart card management system does, and I'll skip over this so that we can get to Nigel fairly quickly. In general, it manages the card products, so this is where you define which applications go to a particular card holder, what card segment he's from, how those products are configured, and what settings those products have. It contains a whole workflow engine to make sure that the card is issued properly, the correct keys are used, all the correct processes are used, as well as a chip database so you know everything that happened to that particular card, which is very useful coming for diagnosis, problem diagnosis, and can be used for marketing purposes as well. On the right side are more operational issues, things like access control, because you are talking about sensitive cardholder data, very elaborate reporting functionality and auditing functionality to know what settings were changed, by whom, what were they before the change, and what were they after the change. And this smart card management system takes in the output from your existing card management system, enriches that embossing file with the smart card data, including the keys and security information that aren't shown on that diagram, and then send that enriched embossing file down to your bureau to actually produce the cards. And then the last piece of the ACI suite is the Issuer product. ACI Issuer is a card management system that is EMV enabled. Issuer is a very flexible, very powerful card management system. Allows you to create new card products quickly. It is EMV enabled. It is already multi-language and multi-currency. Stands on its own right as a good card management system, and is also integrated to Token Manager to get out EMV cards. And while those are the 3 or 4 major products, the rest of the ACI payment suite also supports EMV. The base 24 engines, as we spoke earlier. ACI's Proactive Risk Manager is our fraud detection tool and is fully EMV enabled so that your risk people can use EMV data fields as part of their rules and as part of their queries. Our settlement product, Payments Manager, handles the EMV tokenization and for things like the representments of disputes. And again, a piece often forgotten, our testing tools. Our asset testing tool is fully EMV enabled to act whether it's driving transactions at your systems or act as a host to approve transactions coming out of an acquiring system. Okay, so wrapping up for my part, what do you do next? Well, you'll want to get started in 4 areas. First, make yourself more aware of EMV. There's lots of EMV training out there. There's events like this one. There's lots of information online. I highly recommend the EMV Co. website itself. I recommend you speak to your vendors, obviously. You're speaking to an ACI event today. Contact your card manufacturers, your bureaus. If your processing is outsourced, contact your processor. What is their state of EMV? When will they be ready? When will they meet certain milestones? What is their status in terms of making the dates set out by Visa? That's all part of assessing your EMV readiness. Your devices, if you're an acquirer, your issuing systems, if you're a vendor. I have one piece of advice. It's to begin simple. As I said earlier, EMV changes or can change along the way. You think you're heading in one direction, and you need to react to a market imperative. So you need to put in place tools and solutions that will support you in changing the future. One very interesting question, how do I get that, is who owns the project at your institution? In Canada, we often found that people were unsure who should run the EMV project. Was it a fraud initiative? Was it a card product management initiative? Was it the ATM channel? It was a very interesting part. Some of them struggled even just out of the gate in terms of who owns this product, who owns this initiative. Which brings me to our third question, which is who in your organization today, or who do you expect, will be responsible for owning an EMV project? And we're actually looking for you to type in an answer here, and if it could be a title or a role, we'd like to know who in your institution is going to own an EMV project. I'll give you a few moments to type in those words. And while we're still going, so wrapping up for ACI, ACI is trying to help you with a series of webinars. We're going to have another webinar next month specifically focused at acquirers to see what acquirers need to worry about and how they can be assisted in getting to EMV. ACI provides a number of consulting engagements around anything as basic as EMV training up to business reviews and strategic reviews of your EMV planning. And then, of course, we come to the table with a wide suite of EMV-enabled products to support you from transaction processing through issuing to testing tools. And then, almost humorously, we wanted to remind you of the United States' first attempt at chip cards. I don't know if people on the phone go back long enough to remember Visa Cash. These were at the Atlanta Olympics. And it's almost interesting to see if anybody remembers the brands, because both those brands no longer exist in those forums with First Union and Nations Bank. And we're hoping that this time around it's a little more successful. And at that point, I'd like to hand the reins over to Nigel. Nigel Codderington is a consultant here out of Toronto, and I'll let him introduce himself as he speaks to you about an EMV implementation project.
Good afternoon. I've just a little bit about my background. I've been working on EMV for the past 10 to 15 years or so, and as you might gather from my accent, I came originally from the UK, but I came to introduce EMV to Canada in 2000 or so, working with Visa, MasterCard, and most of the main banks and things here. I've worked on both the merchant side and the issuing side, and obviously with the associations, if they can be called that anymore. I am an independent consultant, and I have worked with a couple of clients who have selected smart card management systems. One of them was an issuing bank, and the other was a retailer who is also an issuer of cards. And so I've done both debit, credit, MasterCard and Visa work for these. However, unfortunately, I am under a confidentiality agreement, so I'm a little bit limited in what I can and can't say. So this presentation is not specific to either of those clients. It reflects my own personal views. So now we've got the disclaimers out of the way, perhaps we can move on to some of the more important things, which is why did we select Bell ID, and what does it actually bring as a token manager piece? Well, you can go through the usual selection criteria, and you'll probably have your own criteria about functionality, architectural approach, company strength, and all those other things. But when it came down to it, what I found is that ACI and Bell showed the greatest flexibility to meet our needs, and they provided the richest functionality. They were better suited also to a back-end operating model. And what I mean by that is a lot of the other vendors were proposing a solution which placed the smart card management system in front of their card processing system. So in other words, all transactions went through that card, the smart card management system in order that the smart card management system could play scripts or do whatever it was going to do with the with that transaction. That can be a quick way to getting EMV introduced, but it does also place a lot more risk and emphasis on those front-end systems, which now need to be 100% fault-tolerant and all the rest of it. So the approach that I would suggest is you probably take a back-end model, because most of the scripts and the changes that you need to make to your cards can actually be set up at perso time when you create the cards and will unlikely to need much in the way of change. The things that will need to be changed, though, are things like your PIN management aspects for the card. And to do that, you should focus on just managing those transactions that pertain to PIN management. And you can do that very effectively from the back end. What you'll find is that the bigger processors like FDR and TSYS offer quite adequate standard scripting capabilities, and you can make sure those are mapped to your smart card management system. In terms of that, then I would recommend that you focus purely on the PIN as your main sort of differentiator. The other thing that the reason that Bell did so well is that they were very willing to build the modules needed to manage a PIN program, because some companies do not have a sort of a proper PIN management solution, and Bell ID were able to provide a very good solution. So I'm going to focus on some of the objectives for a smart card management system. This isn't the general lessons for all of the systems, because that would take too much time. And then I'm going to look at some suggestions for implementers. So in terms of objectives for the SCMS, I'm going to focus on three aspects. I'm going to look at key management, perso or fulfillment, and then at PIN management. So in terms of the key management, one of the approaches that you can take is to outsource your key management. And that's a very quick way to get started. However, it is a strategically limiting option. The reason that it's strategically limiting is you're likely to want to share your keys on a number of different vendor types. So you're going to have a perso bureau most likely. You probably also have a card processing organization. You may also have an independent IVR provider. You may have ATMs or other on-us types of devices such as in-store or whatever. So what you should look for is key independence between vendors. So if one key is compromised, or if you need to change it, it only impacts one vendor. That will allow you to have independent testing of those keys. And if you decide that, for example, you want to change your perso bureau, you don't have to change all of the keys at your card processor, your IVR, and all the rest of it, because that's a very complicated process, and it may actually inhibit your ability to move to a new vendor. So that's why key independence is something that you need to be able to move towards, and keeping those keys separate between the different vendors. The other thing I would recommend is you look for a simple turnkey type of solution, which the Bell solution provides, because key cryptography is a complex subject, and you don't want to be recruiting a whole load of PhD candidates in order to manage it. So you need something which is simple and straightforward and easy, or in vertical, relatively easy to understand. So that's why I would suggest using a package type of approach rather than trying to build your own. And obviously the key thing here is to make sure that your system is easily expandable for futures, such as mobile, because the key management system can hold not only EMV keys, it can hold all sorts of other keys for cryptography, for your fulfillment files, and so on. So moving on to the Perso, and actually a lot of the same things apply here as well. You can have your Perso bureau or even your card processor to provide all the EMV tags for you. However, this is not a good strategic way forward because it limits your capabilities. You're likely to have multiple applications and possibly from different vendors. You may have a different debit and credit provider. You may have the ability to have a single card with both debit and credit on it, which unfortunately in Canada that was squashed, but you may have different rules in the States. You're certainly going to have a number of different applications on your card. So even if you have the most basic card and you go with contact and contactless, and you went with something like CAP, which is a application for third-party authentication for use on the internet and so on, you're likely to have 3 to 4 applications as an absolute minimum. So having your independence to manage those yourself is very important, so you can support multiple different vendors with your own platform. You also want to be able to manage what vendors provide your fulfillment. So you may have one vendor who looks after your regular card production. You may have a different vendor, your TSM or whatever it is, who looks after your mobile. You may also have another approach where you issue instant cards in your bank branches or stores or whatever as well. So that's a strong argument for making sure you keep the fulfillment under your own control rather than outsourcing it. But as I say, if you want an early data or a quick approach to getting started, you may want to do it in a phased approach and get your existing vendors to support you while you introduce your smart card management system. So moving on to the actual PIN management functions. As David mentioned, EMV is a challenge because the PIN now resides both on the card and the host. And it may also be different between the applications on any one card. I'm not recommending that you do that because the consumers are most likely going to set it to be the same one anyway, but actually you've still got to manage those between the different applications. So that's why you're likely to need an in-house solution or a smart card management system to manage the whole PIN piece and the changes in keeping those pins synchronized between the card and your host system. So looking at the key channels, what we found in Canada was that it was very much an every man for himself type of approach, where the main banks and stuff were not prepared to share PIN change functionality at ATMs with each other because there were sort of competitive reasons for not doing that, which is very unlike the model that occurred in the UK, where actually PIN change was not seen as a competitive differentiator. It was seen as a general fraud play and in the benefit and the best interests of everybody. However, that wasn't the case here. So we looked at a number of things as a monoline, and then differently, of course, as a bank with their own ATM network. We thought that one of the best approaches was to use an IVR because that does not tie you down to physical bricks and mortar type of approach. And we looked at on-off types of solutions, so that's either your own ATMs or your own store channel or whatever you have. We dismissed ATMs because of the unwillingness to share and the expense of actually doing one-on-one types of arrangements. Also, the internet was a channel of limited interest, partly because apart from a phone type of approach, but if you just have a standard card, you've got to issue some type of reader for the card holder to actually change the card pin itself. That's the pin on the card as opposed to the host part of it. So now you're into the business of the cost of the reader and supporting those readers. The other option from the internet is not actually to provide those readers, but then the user has a fairly unpleasant experience when they try to change that card and they go to the retailer. So that tended to rule that out as a channel for us. So moving on to suggestions for implementers. Now this isn't meant to just be a sort of a blacklist of bad things sort of thing. What I do want to say is that it is easy to focus on some of the negatives in terms of lessons learned or whatever it is. I have found that LID have been a fantastic company with ACI to work with. Their development teams have a highly collaborative approach, and they're likely to work well with your developers. They're extremely knowledgeable, and they tend to deliver when they said they would on time with good quality code with very few bugs. Now that being said, I'm going to move on to some of the suggestions now. It's very easy to think of a smart card management system just as a sort of a black type of box, which is just an interface between systems. That's actually a mistake because it's a lot more than that. It's going to become a fairly essential tool if you use the PIN management system, for example, for managing your card holders. So you need to look at things like the GUIs. Now the GUIs are okay for some of the back office tasks, but they didn't allow us to make sort of fixes on the fly because the underlying assumption was that the data was always correct from the source. However, unfortunately, that's not always the case. And so you can be a little bit restricted in terms of how you fix this data and having to go back to the original source and reissue cards or whatever it is. The other thing is the GUI only goes so far because it's looking at the smart card management system itself. But you do need to consider how you should integrate that with your front-end support systems for the customer care and how they will actually use some of these tools and how you will integrate that, and that's pretty important. You also need to look at your second level of support. Who will need to have access to those GUIs? We also found we needed database access as well as to the GUIs. Sometimes the logs can be very difficult to find individual transactions when you're troubleshooting because they're obviously quite technical, some of these logs. So you need to make sure that some of those sorts of things are available and can be accessible by the GUI. So in terms of the black box approach, I think you need to focus on how will this be used in operation and who will be using it. Look at the GUIs and look at the access to the logs and who is going to be managing this system as you migrate to EMV. And look at the integration for front and second line support. So I think that the key point of this is work out what your operators will be doing early in the requirements phase. Then the other sort of thing to consider is what data you're going to archive and store and how you're going to do that. So you need to consider how you're going to protect and encrypt this type of data. An example, obviously, is the fulfillment type of data. I was very concerned to protect integrity and always keep that data encrypted and so on. However, that can give you quite a few problems because if it comes through and you can't actually touch that data, it means it's very difficult to troubleshoot or to go back and look at the data to find out what went wrong and how to fix things. Equally, you've got to be careful because particularly with PCI compliance and so on, you don't want just anybody having access to that data. So you need to think long and hard about how you're going to pass it, what point that data is going to be encrypted, and how you're going to store that data. Because obviously a lot of the data you need to keep an archive, and some of that data is basically pass-through data, so it's not stored within the smart card management system necessarily. The other thing that we found useful was that you need to budget for a lot of face time, especially around requirements, configuration, testing, and implementation time, because there's a European time difference, and that did cause us a few challenges. They certainly were not insurmountable challenges, and the team in the Netherlands worked great hours and stuff to try and accommodate us. But we did get a heck of a lot out of the sessions when we had Bell ID over here and working with the teams directly. So I'd recommend that when you put your budgets together, allow for plenty of face time. The other thing that you need to consider really right up front is how you're going to train your operators. The problem that we have, obviously, is that a lot of these people are busy doing the day-to-day operations, and they've got rotating staff and so on. And although I managed to engage a lot of our people, it wasn't really, there's no actual real substitute for doing that job. So when you also go live, you should also think about having Bell on site, or ACI Bell ID on site, for the first few weeks of operations. So if we move on then, one of the things that you should consider is the product hierarchy, and considering how Bell ID put these and things together for you. So what are these? These are the different profiles and templates and applications on the card. So you have got things like PSE, PPSE, which are basic selection mechanisms within the card. These are applications which allow the card to function correctly and quickly and so on. But they are new applications, and actually they aren't actually either payment or anything else. They're just independent applications that you need to think about on that card. So typically you'll have, if you have a contactless, a minimum of 3 applications will give you a basic credit card. You may also want to have debit. You may also want to have a cap for a card not present type of thing, which is some of the associations like you to have some of that as part of your standard package. So setting these up can be very complex and time-consuming. Depends how many bins you have and different card type products that you support. The other thing to really make sure is that the card bureau actually uses the variable values that you've been providing, because you've gone to a great deal of expense to put this system in, and you may find it a surprise that sometimes they don't look at some of these variable values because they're just plonking in fixed values. So make sure you test that all the values really are variable, which gives you the flexibility in the future to make changes as you see fit and not be driven by somebody else's timeline and schedules. Then the other thing I would suggest is that at the sort of contract time or at front, you consider when do you actually want your warranty to start. Is it when Bell ID finish and complete their installation, or is it when you go operational? It's more likely when you go operational that you're going to need that warranty to actually start. And if, like a number of other institutions, you're fairly cautious in your approach, you may be doing a period of parallel running, and you may be still working on some of your infrastructure needs, like your disaster recovery and so on. So you have like a soft launch, which incidentally I would recommend as a de-risking type of approach. But you need to consider that when you're talking about your warranty, because otherwise you may find you're halfway through your warranty before you've actually even gone operational. And the same thing goes for when you want your on-site support. Obviously you need it for when you're implementing this, but the key thing I would stress is you also need it when you first start going operational, because your operators and users will not be used to this new stuff. Even though you've tried your best to train them and so on, there will be questions and things, and to have people on site for the first few weeks is a very good thing. So, key management is obviously a very complex area, and you need to have a clear idea on your key management before you really start doing very much else. What are the keys that you're going to need? You're probably going to need 30 or 40 keys, absolute minimum, and possibly an awful lot more, depending on the number of bins and things that you have. You need to consider who needs them. So you've got different vendors. How are you going to be sharing these keys between them? How do you make sure you keep those independent and so on? And some of the keys flow through the system. So, for example, if you're sending an encrypted PIN or something from your card bureau, that's got to go to your Purser bureau. Well, you don't want to be using the same keys all the way through, so you need to consider those things. How are they going to be transported between you so you share those keys? How and when will they be rotated? What are the ISO formats that you will use for your actual critical data, especially things like the PIN? Some of those things can really trip you up, especially when you're talking with different card processors and things who have quite different understandings of some of these things. So that will pay dividends when you're dealing with multiple third parties. The other thing is, don't underestimate what a hardware security module. I'll just briefly say what that is. It's a secure box, basically, for managing your cryptography and keys. So you're likely to need several hardware security modules, both within your own systems and with your external partners, in order to maintain maximum security for your keys. So what you should be doing is starting that procurement process early, and make sure that those HSM vendors are actively engaged in the project and setup. You'll find that ACI and Bell do most of the software integration on behalf of the client, depending on which HSM that you actually select and whether it's one of the ones that they support. But you will need to directly engage that vendor, especially in terms of making sure that you've got a non-stop running environment, how you're going to do your disaster recovery, how you're going to share your keys between the different environments and so on. So what I would suggest is you might want to consider bringing them in early as part of the project team. And the other thing that you obviously need to consider very, very early on is involving your IT architects, because this can often be some of the sort of stumbling blocks, the things that hold the project up, is getting the basic hardware and infrastructure stuff sorted out, because this is likely new to a lot of these people. So the expertise isn't necessarily there, and it'll take them quite a while to get this stuff straightened out. Also, hardware is very much considered these days as, it's very easy, you just plonk in this box in, so don't worry about it, and it quite often ends up being on the critical path, so start that part early. The other thing I would suggest you do is that you bench test the transfers of your encrypted data early. There's no need for you to actually wait until you have built all of your systems. There are plenty of tools and simulations that you can do in advance, which will iron out a lot of the problems that you're likely to experience later on in terms of how the data is encrypted and so on, and it'll make sure everybody has a common understanding. The assumption that the card processors and the bureaus have all done this before, so it should be falling off a log, is a false assumption, in my experience. Yes, they've done it before, but it's always slightly different for different clients and so on. So you can save yourself some grief with that. So I think above all other else, you need to make sure you engage all your other vendors, the credit processor, the card bureau, early. There are going to be lots of cryptographic issues, and you need to try and resolve those early by getting everybody engaged. So I think we're sort of pretty close to out of time, so we need to move on to the questions.
Okay.
Things.
So while we're talking about the implementation of card portfolios, we're hoping people could indicate when they plan on moving their first portfolio, whether it's credit or debit cards, to EMV. So you can see the time frames on the right. If you're offering them today already, within the next year, within 12 to 24 months, farther out than that, or today you have absolutely no plans to offer them whatsoever. If you could just click on those on the right, we'd appreciate that. Closed. So I'll just sum it very quickly. As a card issuer in the States, this has now become one of your hot topics for the year and for the next couple of years. Visa, MasterCard, and as the other networks weigh in, have made it so. Getting out EMV cards in the right configurations and the right way to support them in the field is critical to your issuing business. If you don't do it properly, your competitors will. You need to consider both in-house and outsourced solutions. Both are viable. Both have advantages and both have risks. You need to consider very seriously how you want to support your EMV cards. And just to finish off, ACI is here to support you through this, whether it's in education, consulting, and in the products and solutions that we can bring to the table. ACI is here to support you in your path to EMV. One final question, just a quick yes, no. We're hoping this webinar was informative. You just please let us know so that we can keep on this track as we continue our webinar series on EMV. And while that's happening, I'll also be pleased to answer take any questions. You can submit them in the Q&A box to the right of your screen. And I did get two while the webinar is going that I'll address very quickly before we do drop off, as we're just a little bit over time. First question was, do we think that the EMV will go chip and PIN or chip and signature for EMV implementation? And my first response to that is that's like the $64,000 question. And I think Nigel and I will answer that one separately. My first opinion is I hope it's chip and PIN. The world kind of voted on chip and signature versus chip and PIN years ago. Almost the entire rest of the world is chip and PIN. EMV is specifically designed to address counterfeit fraud and lost and stolen card fraud. And the PIN, the counterfeit is addressed by the chip, but a chip and signature card, if it's stolen, the person forged the signature, is still just as viable to loss. Chip and PIN is the way to go, in my opinion. Nigel?
I think that the situation in the States is complicated by the various aggregators and so on, which is sort of driving the sort of chip and signature type of path. From an implementation perspective, obviously chip and signature is very much easier, and you can do it in a phased sort of manner. And if you're smart about the way you do it, you can do it in such a way that you can convert those chip and signature cards to chip and PIN when you're ready to do it. The advantage of doing that is it buys you time. You start getting out there for the liability shift dates and so on. But you obviously, as David says, have the lost, stolen thing. So chip and PIN is the way to go. It's just that it may be you have to do a phased type of approach to get there.
Okay, very common. The second question we received during the webinar was about EMV and its effect on e-commerce and card-not-present transactions. So why don't you start off on that one, Nigel?
I think that what has been noticed sort of worldwide, really, is that once EMV is introduced, the fraud does migrate, and the way it goes to is the card-not-present and internet and so on types of transactions. So you are going to have to strengthen up your security around those. There are a number of ways that you can do that with secure code and so on. EMV in itself lends itself to loading additional applications onto the card. We mentioned CAP briefly, which is a three-factor authentication, something you know, something you have, and so on. The challenge with that is you're starting to get into the business of issuing devices to people. And I would suggest that perhaps the way to go is look at the way mobile is coming along. That actually gives you a much better device or mechanism for dealing with those online types of transactions.
Excellent. Okay. I think I want to respect everybody's time. We're now well over the 3 o'clock Eastern time frame. I'd like to thank everybody for their participation. I'd like to remind everybody there will be another webinar in this series from EMV, the next one focusing on acquirers. If you received an invitation to today's session, you will likely get an invitation to that one. You can also check the ACI website under events, and you'll be able to keep up to date on that. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. We're glad you did find it useful. The results of the last poll said so. And remind everybody also that this webinar will be available on the ACI website for your replay at your leisure. Thank you all very much, and have a pleasant rest of the day. Goodbye.